Hi everyone and welcome back to my channel. So one thing about me is that I really love books that I feel are weird or unique, strange, books that have something interesting going on besides, just the actual simple plot of the book. I'm a very big fan of like structural innovation. And so when I see a book doing something weird or new and interesting, I'm immediately drawn to that book. And I thought some of you might appreciate some of those kinds of recommendations. So first, I'll start with this. And you might be like, isn't that just playing cards? And it is, but it's actually a book of poetry that you can play. So what I love about this is the fact that it's a book of poetry, but depending on how you play the cards, you can put together poems in a multitude of ways. And also, it just has incredible, beautiful art on all of the cards. So I think this is one of the coolest things I own. I got this when I went to a writing convention earlier this year, and there were a number of small independent presses. And the thing about a small independent press is that they always are doing something new and inventive. So if you're looking for books that are different from the typical books that you'll pick up in the bookstore, always seek out small independent presses. This particular book came from Game Over Books, the independent press. So definitely check them out. I realized I didn't even mention the name of the book. So this is called I Wish I Wasn't Royalty, and it has poems by John Francis Quinones, Taylor Steele, Jazz Sufi, and Lyd Havens. Art by Catherine Weiss. So definitely check out this book. The next book I have is The Employees by Olga Ravn. Now, the thing about this book is that it's just so weird. So basically in The Employees, there is this interstellar ship that has a crew of humans and humanoid beings. And one day they take on a number of these strange objects. And basically they have a daily task of keeping staff reports and memos. And so throughout this, we see what having these strange objects do to the members on board. So what I really love about this is how those memos and the daily tasks work. So in the book, they are written like this, as like statements, and they're not all in order, and you don't get every one of them. So it's just a mind-blowing experience of seeing how the story has unfolded, is unfolding. It's just a weird book, but it's so interesting, and I definitely recommend picking this up. Next, I have The Mixquiahuala Letters by Castillo. Now, this book is an epistolary novel, so it's a book written in letters, of course, it's in the title. But what I think is really cool about this book is that you can read this book in a multitude of ways. It looks like this, and it says, "Dear reader, it is the author's duty to alert the reader that this is not a book to be read in the usual sequence. All letters are numbered to aid in following any one of the author's proposed options." So those options are for the conformist, for the cynic, for the quixotic, and if you're committed to nothing but short fiction, all the letters read as separate entities. So it tells you good luck with whichever journey you choose. And so I think it's interesting in that you can read it in these multitude of ways. When I read it, I'm definitely the one who's committed to short fiction, so I just read all of the letters because I want to know all of what the book has for me. Next is In the Dream House by Carmen Machado. Now this, I think, is the most interesting memoir I've ever read. And I've read a good couple of memoirs. So what this book does that I think is just interesting is that all the chapters are in these sections, and these sections start as Dream House as. And so you'll have one that says Dream House as creature feature, or Dream House as stoner comedy, or Dream House as man versus nature. And basically the book is about this relationship that Carmen Machado was in that was abusive, and we explore that relationship through this dream house. And so I think this is just the most interesting way I've seen a memoir done. And there's one section here that I especially love, and it's called Dream House as Choose Your Own Adventure. As you can see, I've made an annotation that just says, wow, this is like one of my favorite parts of the book. I definitely think this is like the memoir you should pick up. If you never read any other memoir, this one should definitely be the one you read. The next book I have is Jane by Mendelsund. This is a poetry collection. It is such an interesting collection of poetry. I definitely think for people who might not read poetry often, this is definitely accessible. But what is so interesting about this book is that this book is about Mendelsund's aunt Jane, and Jane was murdered. And in this book, we have some of Jane's diary entries prior to her murder, of course, and Mendelsund's poetry, and those two things interweave in such an interesting way. And I think this is definitely just like a read that you have to pick up. It was so beautiful, so heartbreaking, but definitely just like an interesting way to read about this woman's family's history. It's an amazing collection. You definitely should pick it up. Even if you don't like poetry, this is definitely worth the read. So the next book I have for you is Blackouts by Torres. And in this book, a young man is going to visit his older mentor figure, and that mentor is dying. But this mentor has a project he wants to pass on, and it is this book called Sex Variance, a study of homosexual patterns. Now, Sex Variance was a real book, so you have that real piece of history working with the fictional aspects of this book. And Sex Variance was basically this queer study by this queer researcher named Jane Gay. And the book that the older mentor passes to this young man has been redacted by black marker. So while you're reading, you get pages out of Sex Variance, and they look something like this. And so reading this is such an intertextual experience because there's so many different weird things happening in this book. You have images, and you have those blacked out lines from the book. And then there's sort of like a vignette style structure to the actual chapters themselves. And it becomes just such a weird, strange, beautiful experience. And the plot itself is just so moving, so engaging. There's this one section of the book that sort of turns into sort of a screenplay. And it is one of the most interesting books I've read probably ever. And then at the very end of the book, in the paperback edition, there is a zine that the author includes that just gives you even more information. So this is definitely one of the coolest books I think I've read, and I definitely think you should pick it up. Okay, the next book I have is Remember You Will Die by Eden Robbins. And what's cool about this book is that it's told all in obituary. So the story is sort of following this woman who everybody is kind of after and sort of wants to kill. But what is so impressive about this book is that it is able to follow the structure of these obituaries, and for that structure never to feel stale or boring or just unnecessary. It feels so important, and it is so well done. I definitely love this book. This was a 5-star read for me. Definitely recommend. Next, I have Several People Are Typing by Calvin Kasulke. And this is a book that is told entirely in like a text format. So I think the whole book is written on a Slack channel. And in this book, this man sort of gets sucked into the Slack channel. And it's such an interesting story. And so all of the book is written, like I said, in like text format. And I was so impressed that the author was able to do that form for so long, because in many books you have parts of the book that are text messages, but to be able to sustain that for, let's see, about over 200 something pages, I think it's just such an impressive feat. So definitely would recommend this. There's some weird things that happen in this, some things that I was like, very questionable, but I still would recommend. Next I have The Bee Sting, and The Bee Sting has this one really interesting structural thing that it does, which is why I'm putting it in this recommendation video, which is that the book is written in POV, and different POVs of this family of 4, and we're following these 4 people, and so the POVs get shorter and shorter. And what I mean by that is that when the book starts, every person has this sort of really long section of the book, and as the book goes on, their sections each get smaller and smaller until we get to the end of the book, and we're switching between the POVs really quickly. And so it starts to look like this in the book. So as you can see, it's going from POV in the matter of sentences, when at the beginning of the book, we had POVs that took 100 pages or so when we were going between them. And so in that, I think this is a really interesting book. And so it does keep a very kind of traditional form, but as the structural innovation starts to really get underway, it gives you this breathless feeling until you hit the very end. And the end, I had to take a few deep breaths at the end. I had to take a few deep breaths. So I would definitely recommend. This is a bigger book, so, you know, settle in. But I definitely would still say you should pick it up. Okay, the next book I have is Jonathan Strange and Mr.Norrell by Susanna Clarke. This is another big book. And the main reason I'm putting this on here is because What this book does with footnotes, I have never seen another book do. This book takes footnotes very seriously, and the footnotes are so integral to the book. I think this might be the book that does footnotes the best I've ever seen it, and you get really, really long footnotes. For instance, this, like, half of this page is just like a footnote. And the footnotes in here makes the world feel so real, because we'll mention one thing about maybe like this one king, and then we'll go back in time through a footnote to see how this one thing that this king did, how that affected what is happening in this present moment. And it is so well done. It is so brilliant. I literally can't get over it. This is an amazing book. I loved reading it. It's very much a fall read, so I would definitely pick it up around now. It is really long, yes, but I feel like just take it a day at a time. Read like 30 pages a night. It is such a worthwhile read. Okay, the next book I have is Knox by Anne Carson. This is another memoir, but also a poetry book. And what I think is so cool about this book is this. So you open it up like this, and then the book sort of unfolds like that. Okay, let me stop that before I unroll the whole thing. But isn't that such a fun reading experience? I read this book for a class, and I had never seen a book do something so inventive like this before. And so this was just a mind-opening experience of what books can do. Okay, the next few books I want to show you are books I actually haven't read yet, but I picked them up because I knew they were doing some cool, interesting things, and so I bought them for those reasons. But I want to show you just in case you want to pick them up too. So I have What We See When We Read by Peter Mendelsund, and this is a book about books. So I know a lot of book readers love a book about books, and so I wanted to pick this up because I was like, oh, well, what do we see when we read? But when I opened it, it just had the most interesting, like, things going on. So I picked this up because I wanted to know what all these images were about, and I wanted to know what Peter Mendelsund was seeing when he was seeing books. And I believe Peter Mendelsund is an award-winning designer of book covers, so I thought this would be a really cool, fun read for me. Next, I have this book called Endling, and this is by Reva. I really picked this up because a bookseller recommended it to me, and this is one of the Booker Prize long lists. I don't think it made the short list, but it is doing some really interesting things structurally. And the main thing that the bookseller pointed out to me was that it does this interesting thing where it goes from chapter 44 to 44 again, to 44 revisited, and to 44 correctly this time. And that just tickled my brain. I was like, I have to know what that's about. I have to know what is going on in chapter 44. So I bought this book, and I'm excited to get to this one very soon. So next I have S by J.J. Abrams and Doug Dorst. This is, I believe, a mystery thriller. And this book is doing so many interesting things. First, in its actual form, so the form the book takes. So when you get the book, there's, I believe it's like plastic wrapped, and then you take the plastic off, and then there's the seal, and you break open the seal. And this is sort of like a book within a book. And so if you can see there's sort of like a library binding, even though this isn't a library book. But in the book, there basically is these two people who are reading this library book, and they're trading this book back and forth. And so that's what this book is. So when you open the book, you'll see the writing between the two people in the marginalia. And so that is the book. But then you also have this book, this library book that they're reading, and they leave little things inside the book for each other. So you'll open the book, and there'll be like this newspaper clipping or this postcard. And so it's so many interesting things and cool things to find inside this book. And I definitely have to be very careful when I'm handling it, because when I tell you I have the biggest fear of dropping it and all of everything and it falling out and getting out of order with the pages. It's very scary for me, but I am so excited to get to this book one day. Even though I don't read mystery thriller, I will bear through it for this. Okay, the next book I have is Dear Memory by Victoria Chang. And so this is a memoir, and it's told in the form of letters, but it also has all of this archival material from Victoria Chang and her family. And something about just archival material is really interesting to me. So you'll have these images of things that Victoria Chang has included, these pictures of her family. And also, I'm just a really big fan of epistolary novels, memoirs, essays, whatever. So I really am interested in this little sort of memoir essay collection. And so the next book I have is The Look of the Book by Peter Mendelsund and David J. Alworth. I didn't know this was another Peter Mendelsund until I was looking at the author names, but makes sense. And so I was really interested in this book because I'm interested in how book covers change over time, how trends affect book covers. And there's one really cool part in this where it has just this like this small little insert of these book covers. But I love just like the exploration of book covers and how they've looked throughout time. It's a really cool, interesting book, and I definitely recommend picking it up if you are also interested in book covers and just books themselves. Okay, we are finally at the last book, and that is What It Is by Lynda Barry. This is sort of like a book for writers and creatives. It's really thinking about images and what real images are, how objects summon memory, and it's a book that's really just thinking about the creative method and how to go about that in playful ways. And so looking in the book, you can see that it's full of like comics and writing and images, and it has a sort of memoir quality to some of the parts of the book as well. But it's a book you haven't really seen done before in this way, at least to me. And I think it is such an interesting book. I'm actually almost finished with this book, but I'm not finished with it, so that's why I included it in this section of our video. So please tell me some interesting books that you found that you really love, that are inventive, structurally informed, that is doing something different that you haven't seen before. And I'll see you in my next video. So please like, leave a comment, subscribe. Bye!